Hello guys and welcome to my guide for the Affliction Warlock in 8.1.5. My name is Squiggle and today I'm going to be bringing you guys through why the Affliction Warlock is so prevalent in Mythic raiding at the moment and what you guys can do in order to do these exceptional numbers that you guys are seeing the top guilds in the world do. Now of course right now is when the Crucible of the Storms progression is on. You guys are seeing Method are doing extremely well with their progress, and they are running an insane amount of warlocks. At the start they were running about 7 Affliction Warlocks, and now I think they're up to the number 9. So you guys can see that this is by far the best DPS class in the game at the moment for the current raid tier, and I'm going to show you guys what you need to do in order to hit these huge numbers. In this video I'm going to go over briefly what sort of damage the Warlock is doing, and why there are so many in the current raid tier, and why Method are stacking this sort of class. I'm also going to go over what sort of talents, stats, trinkets, and rotation you should use on the Warlock, and I'm going to give some brief AoE tips. I am going to say that this is not too in-depth when it comes to AoE. It is going to be focused mainly on single and light cleave multi-target. Maybe the 1 to 3 region is what we are going to specialize in today. So without further ado, here is my guide and I really hope you guys enjoy. So first off, we're going to have a quick look at what sort of damage these classes are doing in Heroic. Now unfortunately there is not enough data to go on to show what is going the best for Mythic. We do not have too many logs from that, but we can see what sort of compositions the top teams are running for both of these bosses. So to start off with, Shadow Priest and Affliction Warlock are just doing insanely well at the moment. Shadow Priest is of course doing a lot more damage than the Affliction Warlock, especially on the first boss, and it is a very valuable member to the team as well. However, due to the way that the mechanics are arranged in the last boss, the Warlock can actually make very good use of his demonic circle and his gateways in order to make sure that he doesn't need to move too much for mechanics. He can be turreting the boss at all times, and he doesn't need to lose any downtime on his rotation at all. So remember when you are looking through these logs that this does not mean everything, damage does not mean everything, and that these should all be taken with a very large grain of salt. If you are looking to progress on the bosses, I can tell you that Shadow Priest is insanely good for the first boss, as long as you have enough Affliction Warlocks in order to do the dispels that are required. There is a minimum amount of Affliction Warlocks for the mechanics, however once you meet this quota you should definitely be stacking your Shadow Priest. After this, for Unat, you should be going for mainly the Affliction Warlock, and I can just tell you that if you are playing either of these classes, you are just going to be really wanted in the current raid tier. The bosses are extremely hard, we can see some nerfs to come, however I do not see these 2 titans shifting anytime soon from the throne. Now credit where it's due, I actually have a friend who is helping me with this video by supplying me with some tips and tricks for the Affliction Warlock, as my Affliction Warlock is not too crash hot at the moment. It is not as geared as I would like it to be, and for this reason I'm going to be using his resources and his stream in order to help you guys play the Affliction Warlock. Now to start off with, if you want to be doing some big damage, this is the guy to be looking out for. In progression and in the first couple of kills, he is just doing insane damage. He could play any of the Warlock specs, and I've seen him do insanely well on Fire Mage and Shadow Priest alike. So now we are going to have a quick look over what sort of traits we want to be running on the Affliction Warlock. Now to start off with, the main trait that I'm going to highlight in this video is going to be the Inevitable Demise trait. Now not only does this give really good damage, but it also gives you an insane amount of healing, as this actually stacks up the healing as well as the damage whenever you cast it with your extra stacks. Now this is imperative to the strategy that Method are using on the final boss Unat, and this allows them to really underheal the boss, as the Warlocks are just healing themselves for an insane amount. Now after this, it is recommended that people go 3 Wrecking Brilliance at all times. Wrecking Brilliance is always just going to give you extremely high amounts of intellect, and this is just a flat amount for how much your agony is gaining. So single target, this is going to be extremely good, and multi-target, it is going to be good for the same reason. if you can get your multiple agonies out, which you should at all times. Now after this, there is actually a bit of a noob trap when it comes to Pandemic Invocation. Now Pandemic Invocation, if you are doing complete standstill DPS, is a completely fantastic trait. However, the problem with it is, if you do incorporate any movement into it, then this trait is just going to go completely down the gutter. Now, the reason for this is any time that you are moving, the only DPS that you can actually do is reapplying your dots. So whenever you are on the move, you want to be reapplying your dots, and this is another reason why the Affliction Warlock is so good in progression. It means that you don't really mind moving around for a few seconds because you can just reapply these dots. Do not run this on progression, only run it if you are doing complete standstill and you know exactly what is going on. After this, Cascading Calamity is actually going to be insanely good for our single target. Now this actually stacks up really high as well past the first trait, so it is very viable for you guys to run the triple Cascading Calamity if you have it. After this, it is actually pretty good to have one sudden onset when it comes to multi-target situations. Now we aren't actually running the Writhe in Agony build, however even if we are running Absolute Corruption, this is going to be fantastic and it is going to give some really good damage overall. After this, we are going to have a quick mention about our best in slot secondary trait, the Overwhelming Power. Now this is an extremely busted trait, it just gives an insane amount of haste, and as long as you aren't taking crazy ticking damage, then this is almost always going to get full value. Now the Overwhelming Power, it just gives you a flat amount of haste, and a lot of Warlocks, they opt to go for weaker pieces on their main traits in order to go for the Overwhelming Power on their second traits, as it is just such an incredible boon of haste. Now we are going to have a quick look at what sort of talents you want to be running when you are playing the Affliction Warlock on AoE. Now whenever you have an extra target past the first, you want to be running your Absolute Corruption at all times. Now not only is this a lot easier to play around, but it basically gives you an insane amount of damage through not having to reapply this corruption every say 20 seconds. Now this is absolutely phenomenal, as you don't have to think about, do I use a soul shard versus do I use a corruption? Do I dot a new target versus do I keep my dots on an old target? Instead you have this extremely fluid gameplay that doesn't really change that much. So this is by far the easiest talent and the best when it comes to 2+ target. Now for the mandatory ones that are pretty much not going to change, we're going to be taking Deathbolt, Phantom Singularity, Haunt and Dark Soul Misery at all times. These are very cookie cutter when it comes to the Affliction Warlock, and they do very good single target and AoE. Now when we come to the next line, the Burning Rush versus the Demon Skin, we are actually going to see a bit of a conundrum that people come into. Now Burning Rush is of course very good if you have to be moving around a lot, however it comes at the sacrifice of your own HP. So it requires very careful usage, and you got to make sure that you aren't dipping too low in the current raid, as there are actually mechanics that can insta-kill you if you get a little bit too low. Now after this, Demonic Circle is pretty much going to be our go-to when it comes to raiding. Now Mythic Plus, you guys can always run the Shadow Fury talent in order to reduce the cooldown of this ability. However, as highlighted before, this is meant to be more of a raiding guide, so we're going to be using Demonic Circle pretty much all the time in raid, unless people have asked you not to. Now when it comes to single target environments, we want to be going off our sim, which is going to show us that Siphon Life is going to be the best talent for this tier. Now it is also worth mentioning that this is going to give us a small heal as well, which is not negligible and is actually quite helpful when you require it on some of these high damage fights. So now we're going to have a look at what sort of trinkets we want to be running on the Affliction Warlock. Now to start off with, I want to say that this has to be taken with a small grain of salt as well, as you can't pair two of these very strong trinkets together. There are some trinkets that are actually insanely potent because they have an on-use effect, which is going to line up with your Dark Glare and your other talents in order to make sure that you're doing maximum damage inside that burst window. So to start off with, we are basically going to be looking at getting the Dread Gladiator's badge or the Balefire branch for this reason. Now both of these are very good trinkets. The only difference between these is going to be the cooldown on these. So a lot of people like taking the Balefire branch simply because it is 1 minute 30-second cooldown. This means that every 2 uses of this trinket you get 1 use of Dark Lair with it, which is extremely potent. So next up, I'm also going to talk about what sort of trinkets you want to pair with it. Now we are going to have a look at the Harbinger's Next up, we are going to have a quick look at what sort of trinkets you want to pair with these on uses. Now the best one on paper is going to be our Harbinger's Inscrutable Will, which is going to have the drawback of silencing us if we get hit by an ability that the trinket makes. Now if you don't want to deal with this altogether, that is fine. You can just look at getting another trinket. However, if you want to go with the risky play, this is technically the best in slot trinket. So next up, we're going to have a look at the Incandescent Sliver versus the Lady Waycrest Music Box. Now of course, I've talked about this countless times in the past. The Incandescent Sliver is fantastic as long as you can keep it at a very high uptime. Now thankfully for these bosses that are in the new raid, you don't need to do too much stacking, and therefore this trinket is pretty much being run by everyone. Now last raid, Battle for Desire Law, it actually had every single fight had a stacking mechanic in it, and for this reason the Incandescent Sliver was pretty much terrible on any fight apart from maybe Rastakhan or Conclave if you're lucky. Now for our Lady Waycrest Music Box, this is simply going to be one of our best simming trinkets that has an equip effect. Now it's just going to go off whenever, and therefore it is just a very basic and good trinket if you want to farm it. Now very shortly I'm going to quickly go over what sort of races we want to be running when it comes to the Warlock. So the Troll is going to be the best for the Horde side, and the Gnome is going to be the best for the Alliance side. So for our stats, we want to make sure that we're going a butt ton of mastery. We want to make sure that everything is having a ton of mastery on it, as this is going to be our best stat for single target and AoE on the Affliction Warlock. After this, we are going to go for a good amount of haste, followed shortly by crit. Now the haste is going to be extremely good for single target and falls off just a little bit when it comes to AoE. However, a minimum amount of haste is very important when it comes to the Warlock. You can actually see my friend Ramsay, he goes for about the 1.2k mark, and he sacrifices a little bit of mastery from one of his gems in order to do so. This is probably because one of the Sims is telling him that this is the route to go. This is probably so that he can get a certain amount of UAs into a window into his opener, which in turn would increase his damage by just that little bit. Now, as you guys can see by this gear, versatility is something that we are going to avoid like the plague. Now, sometimes we can't really avoid the versatility. We sort of gotta bite the bullet. Sometimes you just get that juicy 425 piece that's just a little bit too tempting. However guys, if you run a sim on it, for the most part, it should give you a little bit of clarity in some of these pros and cons. So next up, we are going to be talking about what we are running with the Affliction Warlock for our opener and our standard rotation. So on a single target, we want to make sure that we are opening up with a Haunt pre-pull. We are going to make sure that we are getting this out as soon as possible, as this does have a travel time. So for this reason, it is always efficient to use this pre-pull. Now after this, we are going to make sure that we are getting our Agony on as many targets as possible right on the pull. If this is just a single target, you're going to follow it up quickly with the Siphon Life, followed by a Corruption. After this, you want to be making sure you are using a macro in order to use your Dark Soul Misery and your Phantom Singularity at the same time. After you use both of these, you want to be jamming out every single UA that you have right there. If you only have 4 UAs, you want to make sure that you are using your Shadow Bolt straight away in order to get a 5th UA. We're going to make sure that we are having our dots on the target at all times, and under no circumstances can we let the Agony fall off the target, as it takes a little bit of time to ramp to our max damage, and we want to keep it this way during the whole fight. After this, you want to make sure that you are pooling your soul shards to about 3. You want to make sure that you are using your soul shards when you do have Death Bolt ready to go, and our general rotation during the fight is just going to be keeping these dots up, making sure we use our UAs at the same time as our Death Bolt. And yes, once we have these UAs out, make sure that you press your Death Bolt, and if you have your inevitable demise above say 45 ticks, we want to make sure that we are using our Drain at this point. Now basically we are going to have these small burst windows throughout the fight in order to increase our DPS overall with our big burst windows such as the Dark Glare. Now you can see these mini bursts are going to give you a good amount of damage over the fight, and they are very mandatory for doing very big DPS. Now remember, make sure that you are using Haunt on your primary target at all times. Your primary target is going to be the one that you are using your Unstable Affliction, Haunt, and your Drain Life, as well as your Death Bolt at all times. So as I said previously, we are going to have a quick look at what sort of macros you want to be running on the Affliction Warlock. Now the two small macros are simply going to make sure that you are using two abilities at the exact same time, and this synchronization will in turn make it easier for you to play, as well as increasing your overall DPS. Now the first one is simply going to be using our Dark Soul Misery alongside with our Phantom Singularity. Now because these guys sync up very well, it is very good to use both of these in the same macro, and in turn we are also going to have a similar macro when it comes to our Balefire's Branch and our Dark Glare. Now Dark Glare is going to be 3-minute cooldown, our Balefire is going to be 1 minute 30, so therefore it is very important that you guys have this on the same button, and you are using 2 Balefires for every single Dark Glare that you use. Now if you guys are interested in raiding on the Warlock, make sure that you guys are also using Focus Target and Cursor Target macros for your Imp, and making sure that they are dispelling the right people at all times. It is imperative that you guys use this in order to make sure that you are fulfilling your role as a Warlock, and you are helping your raid by dispelling people who need these dispels. Now that just about wraps up my guide for the Affliction Warlock in 8.1.5. Now this class is going to be extremely busted in the current raid tier, and I really urge you guys to have some fun, go out and play a little bit of Warlock. This is extremely fun, it does an insane amount of damage, and the raid utility is absolutely nuts. If you reroll to this class for the next couple of months, your raid team is absolutely gonna love you, I guarantee it. I also have two quick announcements for you guys who are still watching this video. Firstly, I've opened up a Patreon page. If you guys have, a little bit to spare that you want to chuck me in order to help me continue making these videos, get myself some computer equipment, then it would be greatly appreciated. However, for the meantime, I've made sure that all of my macros and weakauras and stuff are going to be free for everyone, as I don't want anyone to miss out on this sort of gameplay. And secondly, I get NBN, which is basically Australia's version of good internet in less than 2 months, at which point I'm going to be streaming very regularly and uploading more YouTube videos, as they aren't going to take between 8 and 10 hours each to upload. So I'm going to let you guys off from any further rambling from me. If you like this video, make sure that you like it. If you like this video, make sure that you give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or any suggestions, make sure that you leave them in the comment section down below. And if you want to watch more videos, make sure that you've subscribed for more regular content. Thank you for watching, guys, and I hope you have a good day.